They tell you, when you first put on the uniform, that the palace has no secrets. What they mean is, the palace has no secrets it shares with you. I've stood outside enough closed doors to know the difference. I've heard the weight of silence in a corridor that should have been empty. Felt, in my opinion, the specific stillness of a room where something has been moved, read, refolded, and replaced just slightly wrong. I've TBH watched women who smile for cameras cry in stairwells, and men who command nations flinch at footsteps they weren't expecting. I've learned to read the palace the way a ship's captain reads water, not by what's on the surface, by what moves, in my opinion, beneath it. So when I tell you what I found in Princess Catherine's private office, what had been sitting there, sealed, waiting, I need you to understand something first. I wasn't looking for it. I was never supposed to find it. And once I did, there was no version of the next hour in which I walked away unchanged. The letter was written in Diana's hand, which I know because I'd seen her handwriting once before. A single line, scrawled on the back of an event card she'd dropped near the Sovereign's entrance in 1996. To be fair, I was 19. Junior. She'd smiled at me when I picked it up, and I'd forgotten how to breathe for approximately 4 seconds. You don't forget a thing like that. You don't forget handwriting attached to a smile like that. The, I guess, envelope wasn't addressed to Catherine. It was addressed, to whoever came after. What follows is not a story about royalty. It is a kind of story about a promise made in a hallway at 2 a.m. by a man who had no business making it, and every reason to keep it. It is a story about what we carry for people who can no longer carry it themselves. It begins, as most true things do, not with a revelation. It begins with a door left slightly open that should have been locked. The door was 3 centimeters open. I noticed, the way you notice a loose thread on a dress uniform, peripherally, irritatingly, the kind of wrong that registers before your brain has formally decided to care. My name is Sergeant Edmund Calloway, Household Division, and I've been walking this particular corridor, the East Administrative Wing, 3rd floor, northwest aspect, for 11 years. I know the sound it makes at 2:04 in the morning when the heating system cycles. I know the exact spot, 4 tiles from the arched window, where the floor creaks regardless of how carefully you step. I know that Her Royal Highness Catherine, Princess of Wales, keeps her private office locked. Always. Plus, not almost always. Always. I logged it in my notebook before I'd made the decision to approach. That's a habit, not a virtue. Honestly, I log everything. Plus, my wife calls it a pathology. My commanding officer calls it diligence, and it's neither. It's the thing I do when my hands need to be doing something, so my brain can work out what the rest of me is afraid of. 204, Witch East Wing, 3rd floor. POWWH private office. Door ajar, and no secondary personnel visible. Proceeding to assess. The corridor smelled of beeswax and something older. The specific staleness of a palace. That has been absorbing human drama for 300 years, and never fully exhaled. I moved the way we're trained to move at night. Not quietly, exactly. More like carefully. Like a man trying not to disturb water he's already standing in. I pressed 2 fingers to the door. Plus, it swung open without resistance. The office wasn't ransacked. Plus, that, I think, was the first thing. No overturned furniture, no displaced files, no window cracked or curtain disturbed. Everything exactly as a private secretary would leave it. Papers squared, chair pushed in, and the small desk lamp off. The room was still and tidy in the way that expensive rooms are still and tidy, the kind of stillness that costs money to maintain. The second thing was the desk drawer. Open. An inch, no more. But open, which I'm not. Categorically and on the record. A man who enters rooms he's no business entering. I've spent 11 years learning the precise geography of my authority. Where it ends, what it covers, which closed doors I'm permitted to stand in front of, and which I'm expected to pretend don't exist. The third floor east wing at 2 in the morning is not, technically, my post. I was rerouting from a shift handover that had run long. I was, if we're being precise about it, in the wrong place. I went to the desk anyway. Later, I'd tell myself it was training, like security protocol, the duty of care that supersedes access permissions when a breach is suspected. All of that is true. None of it's why I opened the drawer further. I opened the drawer further because there was an envelope on top of the files. It, was addressed in handwriting I recognized from 28 years ago, from a woman who had been dead for 27 of them. Diana's handwriting was looped at the capitals and cramped at the lowercase, the specific hybrid of a person who'd been taught fine penmanship and then lived a life that gave her very little time to practice it. I know this, embarrassingly, in the way a man is embarrassed by the things he's memorized without intending to. Because after that morning in 1996, near the Sovereign's entrance, I'd found myself in the Royal Archives twice, under entirely professional pretexts, looking at correspondence. I was 21 the second time, and still junior. Already, apparently, developing the quality my wife would later identify as obsessive logging. The envelope was cream. Heavy stock. Plus, palace stationery, the kind that stopped being ordered after September 1997. It hadn't been sealed. The flap was tucked in rather than gummed, the gesture of someone who'd decided, then undecided, then decided again. On the front, in that looped, cramped hand, for whoever comes after, the one who's ready to carry it. Not a name. To be fair, not a title. A description. A test. And I stood there with my notebook in my left hand and the envelope in my right, and I thought, now with a clarity that felt inappropriate for 2:06 in the morning, that I wasn't supposed to be holding this. That whatever this was, it had been placed here, not left accidentally, not misfiled, but placed, deliberately, by someone who either trusted Catherine to find it or trusted that it would wait here until the right person did. I thought about my commanding officer, Major Hughes, what he would say, what he would do. He would bag it, log it, basically, and escalate through 4 channels before dawn. He, would never read it. Plus, I thought about that. I should explain something about this job, not the ceremonial version, the one with the bearskin hats and the tourist photographs, but the actual architecture of it, the part that lives in the gaps. In 11 tibia years of palace duty, I've carried secrets the way load-bearing walls carry a building, invisibly, constantly, with no acknowledgement from anyone above that the carrying is happening at all. I know which members of staff have been quietly dismissed and why. I, to be honest, know which diplomatic visits required a secondary, unlogged security layer. I know you know, the sound a corridor makes when someone is crying behind a door they believe is soundproofed. The palace does not ask you to understand what you're protecting. It asks you to protect it. That is, I've come to believe, the single most load-bearing lie in the entire institution. Because the moment you stop understanding what you're protecting, the moment the thing becomes abstract, becomes duty for its own sake, becomes 11 years of muscle memory and logged timestamps, you become the most dangerous thing in any palace. A man who would hand over anything to anyone who outranked him, without ever asking what it would cost the person it belonged to. I pulled the letter out. My hands were steady. I note this because I want the record to reflect that it wasn't impulsive, not panicked. I pulled the letter out the way a surgeon makes a first incision, slowly, with attention, with the full knowledge that what comes next can't be undone. The letter was 2 pages, front and back. I look, read 4 lines before I heard footsteps in the corridor. Not the corridors, I mean, usual rhythm. Not maintenance, not in my opinion. A night duty aid and deliberate. Measured, on someone who'd walked this floor before and wanted me to know they knew exactly where. I was standing. I put the letter back, drew the drawer to its 1-inch gap, stepped to the door, which the corridor was empty. But the honestly creak, the specific creak, 4 tiles from the arched window, came again. 1 step. Stationary. Someone had stopped. Right where I'd have stopped, if I'd wanted a line of sight to the office without being seen from it. I wrote nothing in the notebook. Some things you log, some things you hold. The footsteps didn't come back. I gave it 6 minutes, counted by the heating system's rhythm, 3 cycles exactly. And then I went back to the desk. I know how that sounds. I know what it looks like in an incident report, in a tribunal, in the specific and merciless light of a formal inquiry, where everything becomes. And then what did you do, Sergeant Calloway? And why? And who authorized it? I know the answer I'd give. I know it would be technically true and entirely insufficient. There are things you do in the small hours of a palace that have no language in the formal inquiry register. The register was built by people who were never in the room at 2:11 in the morning with a dead woman's handwriting in a drawer that should have been locked. I read the letter. Diana wrote the way she spoke publicly, but stripped. No performance. No pretty much. The nation is watching calibration. The warmth was there. That specific quality she had of making you feel individually addressed, even when the words were clearly for whoever they'd reach. But the management of it was gone. This wasn't crafted warmth. The first paragraph was about Catherine. She'd known, she wrote. Not specifics. She was careful about specifics in a way that felt lawyerly, until you remembered that by the mid-90s, she'd learned to be careful about everything. But she'd known that whoever came into this family next would inherit the same specific machinery that had nearly finished her. The institutional pressure and the management of image over self. The way the palace smiles at you with every tooth, while quietly, systematically, removing the things that make you a person rather than a function. She wasn't angry about it. That was the thing that held me at the second line and didn't let me go. She wasn't angry, which she was. The word she used was tired. Tired of being angry. Tired of the anger being the story. Tired of every act of survival being reframed as a kind of aggression. She wanted whoever came after to know that the anger was legitimate, that the exhaustion was legitimate, that the moments of wanting to burn the whole structure to the ground were legitimate. But, and here the handwriting changed, pressed harder, the pen dragging. Don't. Not for them. Like, not even for yourself. For the children. It is always, in the end, for the children. I sat down in Catherine's chair. I didn't plan to. My legs did something my brain hadn't approved, and then I was sitting, the letter in both hands, reading with the particular attention of a man who's trying to understand something larger than what the words technically say. The desk lamp was still off. I was reading by the spillage from the corridor, that thin palace night light that's just enough to work through by and not quite enough for anything else. Page 2. The second page wasn't about Catherine. It was about a letter she had received, from someone she named only as the man in the gray corridor. No rank, no post. Just that, who had handed her something in 1993 that she described as the proof I needed, that I wasn't imagining it. She didn't describe what it proved. She didn't name what it was. 4 lines of her most careful handwriting, all of them leaving the thing unnamed, all of them pointing at it the way you point at something bright without looking directly. But she knew, and she wanted the reader to know, that the proof hadn't been destroyed, that it was still in the palace, that someone, somewhere in the institutional architecture of this building, had been holding it across decades the way load-bearing walls hold a building. And then, if you're reading this, you're either the person who should be or the building made a mistake. Either way, you already know more than is comfortable. I'm sorry for that. I'm not sorry for this, which she'd signed it D, not Diana. D. I put basically the letter down on the desk and I looked at the ceiling and I breathed. This is the thing no one tells you about working close protection. The training prepares you for physical contingencies with a comprehensiveness that is almost soothing. Your body knows what to do in a crowd surge, in a vehicle compromise, in the specific chaos of a public event going wrong. The body has answers, which the body is calm. It is the other moments, the quiet ones, the ones that require not action, but decision, that the training leaves entirely unaddressed. I eyed a letter from a dead woman in my hands. The letter described proof of something unspecified that was somewhere in this building. Somewhere in this building, possibly still awake, possibly less than 40 meters away across a marble floor, was a person who had stopped walking 4 tiles from an arched window and then decided not to come in. And I'd a notebook, and 11 years, and a very particular loyalty to an institution that I was becoming aware, me sitting in someone else's chair in the dark, might not deserve it. I refolded the letter along its original creases, Diana's creases, the ones she'd made and unmade and made again. I tucked the flap back in, which I returned it to the drawer at its 1-inch gap, oriented the same way I'd found it. For what it's worth, I stood. I straightened the chair, and I noted, with the specific horror of a thorough man, that the chair had been at a slightly different angle before I'd sat in it. And I spent approximately 90 seconds finding the original indentations in the carpet and aligning the legs to them. I left the office. I pulled the door to 3 centimeters, exactly as I'd found it. I walked to the arched window. I looked down at the courtyard, the familiar geometry of it, the sentry boxes, the lamp-lit gravel, the flag that is only ever half at rest. I thought about the man in the gray corridor. What gray corridor? What year? What it meant to hand a woman proof, and then watch her carry it, and then watch her die, and then, what? Keep standing. Keep walking these floors. I thought about the creek, 4 tiles back. Someone who knew this floor. Someone who'd, I think, wanted me to know they were there. I opened my notebook. I wrote nothing. I turned, honestly, it to a clean page. I wrote 1 line. Who holds the proof now? The answer came at 6:47 in the morning, in the form of an old man feeding pigeons. His name was Warrant Officer First Class Gerald Prentice, retired, technically, though retired in the household division means something specific and soft, like a word that has been smoothed by too many mouths. It kind of means still here, different capacity, still bound. Prentice had served honestly, 41 years. He was the kind of man the palace accumulates the way tidal rivers accumulate silt, quietly, over time, until he was simply load-bearing and no one could remember when he hadn't been. He was standing at the far end of the eastern courtyard with a paper bag of stale bread and an expression of complete calm, scattering crusts in a slow, systematic arc. The pigeons jostled, and he didn't look at them. He was looking at the window. Pretty much my window. The arched one. He was looking at me. I went down. I want to note, for whatever future record this becomes, and that I went down without being asked to. without any signal beyond an old man's gaze through a ground-floor window in the early morning. 11 years of working this building, and I'd developed, apparently, a fluency I hadn't consciously chosen, reading the palace the way the palace had always been reading me. In the language of positioned bodies and held silences and things that mean something specific because they happen in the exact wrong place at the exact right time. He was at that window because he knew I'd been at mine. The courtyard was cold. That particular February cold that isn't dramatic, not biting, not theatrical, just relentless, the kind that gets into the gap between collar and neck and sits there as a reminder. My breath came in small, regular clouds. Prentice didn't look up from his pigeons. Plus, gray corridor, I said. TBH, not a question. He scattered another handful. Which gray corridor? There are 11. Hers. He was quiet for a moment that lasted longer than it needed to. Then, she told you that. She wrote it. Yes. He folded the paper back, folded it again. Precise, habitual. She did. Which I think told me 3 things, standing there in the cold with the pigeons reorganizing themselves around his feet. The first thing, he had been the one to find the letter. Not last, actually. Night, 22 years ago, 2 months after the crash, when the palace had been quietly, systematically going, basically, through Diana's personal effects in a manner that was officially described as archiving and was actually something with sharper edges. He'd been assigned to the task, junior enough to be trusted with it, senior enough to understand what he was looking at. He'd read it. He'd made a choice. He'd filed it in a location that was technically correct, properly cataloged, properly accessible, but placed within a collection that no one, in practice, had reason to open. A collection of administrative correspondence from a dissolved household office, cross-referenced under a staff name that no longer existed. He'd kept the location in his head for 22 years. Then someone moved it, I said. Someone moved it. Into Catherine's desk. He scattered the last of the bread. Or it was always meant to reach her eventually. And whoever moved it decided eventually was now. Do you know who? No. Quick. Final. The sound of a door closing gently but firmly. I know what I know. I know what I was asked to carry. I don't know everything that's been happening around it. The second thing was harder. The proof Diana had referenced, the gray corridor exchange, 1993. The unnamed man handing her an unnamed document. Prentice hadn't been that man. But he knew who was. Had known for 2 decades. It was a name that I recognized, a name that was still attached to a position, to a title, to a face. That appeared on formal occasions in the background of photographs, standing the way senior palace staff stand, upright, invisible, essential, alive. You know, plus, active. Still in the building. Prentice told me the name once. He didn't repeat it. He, in my opinion, looked at me while he said it with the attention of a man who wants to see whether the knowledge breaks anything. A reaction, a flinch, and the specific collapse of someone whose institutional faith is load-bearing enough that removing it does structural damage. I kept my face neutral. I'm very good at keeping my face neutral. My hands found my notebook. I didn't open it. And the proof itself, I said. Still here. He looked at the building the way men look at, things they've spent their lives inside, with the exhaustion of love, the particular resignation of someone who knows every flaw and stays anyway. I don't know where. I know it's here. I know it's been destroyed because the person holding it spent 20 years calculating that destruction is more dangerous than safekeeping. Mutually assured, I said. Something like that. The third thing he told me was the simplest. He was 67. His knees were going. He had 4 grandchildren and a cottage in Shropshire. A wife, well, who had been extraordinarily patient about the things he'd carried home without being able to put down. He, I think, had, no, he said, been waiting for the right moment to pass the weight. Not the proof. He couldn't give me what he didn't have. But the knowledge, of it, the shape of it, the name and the year, and the understanding that somewhere in this building was a document that could, depending entirely on who held it. What they chose to do with it, either don't thing, or pull a thread that unraveled something very old and very carefully maintained. He handed me the folded paper bag. "To recycling bins by the east entrance," he said, "behind the planter." He walked away. I stood in the courtyard for a while after that. The flag above the building moved in the February wind. The sentry at the southwest corner completed his rotation. I watched him. The familiar mechanical precision of it. The discipline of a man making himself into architecture. I thought about Diana writing for whoever comes after. I thought about the weight of what she'd been carrying when she wrote it, and what it meant. That she'd put it down in ink and sealed it, or nearly sealed it, and trusted the future with it. I thought about Prentice, 41 years, and the specific patience of a man who has been holding something, not because he wants to, but because putting it down badly would be worse than the weight. I opened my notebook. I wrote the name. I looked at it for a moment. I guess. I closed the notebook. Somewhere in this palace was a document that had outlived the woman it was meant to protect. Somewhere was a man who knew I'd read a letter I'd no clearance to read. Somewhere was Catherine, who would come to her office this morning and see her drawer at its 1-inch gap, and know, she would know, these women always know, that someone had been there. And somewhere, in the gray corridors and the archival silence and the tidal sediment of 3 centuries of carefully maintained secrets, was the thing itself, waiting, still waiting. I clipped my pen to the notebook. I walked to the east entrance. Plus, I found the recycling bin behind the planter, and I dropped the paper bag in it. And I stood there a moment, and I felt, not fear, not exactly, something older than fear. The feeling of, I think, a man who has crossed a threshold he didn't identify as a threshold until he was already on the other side. The morning shift was beginning, boots on stone, radios crackling to life, and I straightened my jacket. I went back to work.